Hey everyone, Carter here. I know I'm a bit late, but I wanted to put together a best of list for 2023 for myself. That being, it was a big transitionary year for myself. I had a lot of changes occur in my personal life, so I didn't get to keep up on the year's releases as much as I would have liked to otherwise. So, my list will include both games released in 2023 as well as games I played in 2023. Before I get to my top 5, however, I'd like to bring up some honorable mentions and talk about a few other pieces of media that were something special to me this past year. Oh, and as a preliminary, no, I didn't finish Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, if I did, it would 100% be on this list. And also, I'll be lightly spoiling most things on the list, so if you don't want to catch all of that, I will put timestamps right here in the corner where you can skip to when I'm about to go into harsher spoiler territory. Alright, so on to honorable mentions. As someone who mainly grew up on Square Enix's side catalog rather than the mainline Final Fantasies, I've always really liked seeing the studio go out of its way to try new things, especially when it comes to gameplay. And when it came to putting Devil May Cry style combat into a darker tinged Final Fantasy setting, well, I think they pulled it off pretty well in Final Fantasy XVI. It took me a bit to get used to all the different icons, but once I learned how to synergize between them all, I was able to pull off some stupidly fun combos that just melted the enemies away, as well as my PS5 with all those particle effects. I did sadly have my fair share of problems with the game, however, mainly coming from the more MMO-y elements that the team pulled over from FF14, mainly the side quest design and barren open world. They really took so much from that game in bringing it over. And while the towns you got to explore were really nice, I was sad the larger cities and capitals were always relegated to the one-and-done levels. One of my favorite parts of RPGs is getting to explore the game's cities and soak in the tone. So it was disappointing I didn't get to do that with what are supposed to be some of the most important locations in the game's world. And as for the story, while I disagree with the exact wording I've seen of it gets rid of the political elements and becomes a generic RPG narrative, I have to say I do kind of agree with the sentiment. See, the game's narrative focuses on two major conflicts. Conflict 1 is very immediate, easy to emotionally attach to, and closer to things that people have actually struggled through in real life. Conflict 2, however, is not really grounded in that easy to empathize with situation, and there's also a very clear tension in how Conflict 1 emphasizes a sense of helplessness against the large systems of the world, and your contribution to a greater whole. While Conflict 2 is more about how you are special, you're uniquely cursed, you will be the one to save the world. And I just don't think the game pulls off the tightrope between these two conflicts, especially given the less easy to relate to conflict is the one that's emphasized most in the end. To give it another spin, it's kind of a worse Gurren Lagann, missing the strong thematic thread that tied all of the elements of that story together. Still, the game's a blast to play. The story does have its well-done moments, and the grandiose icon fights do end up making the game worth the price of entry. Speaking about Square trying new things, Paranormasight: The Seven Mysteries of Hanjo was such a delight to play. On a moment-to-moment basis, I could feel how much the writers and narrative designers were having fun making this game. It's filled with so many little gimmicks and fun moments that just take advantage of the medium in cool ways, playing with perception and story structure. And the game's cast has such an infectious chemistry as well. There's so much charm in seeing this lovable bunch of idiots all bumble through the haunted death game that kicks off the plot. It's just a bit of a shame though that I did find the story as an entire package to be lacking. While I did love a lot of the game's tricks in isolation, it never coalesces into a greater whole the way I wished it would. Many of those fun little surprises the writers lay for you never really feel like they matter as much in the grand scheme of things. The game's ending just putters and runs out of steam right at the finish line. Still, I would love to see this team do another game with a more polished script and the same passion you can feel here. If that's the direction they took, I think they'd have something incredibly special on their hands. And now, with those honorable mentions out of the way, on to the top 5 games I played last year. I'm relatively new to survival horror, with my first proper foray into the genre being the stellar Resident Evil 2 remake that came out in 2019. Oh, that was 5 years ago. And since I hadn't really delved further, despite the great time I had with it, I'd always been interested in trying some of the classics of the genre, however, and I think I've found my perfect entry point into traditional survival horror with Signalis. Look, if you were trying to create a game tailor-made to get me into survival horror, it'd probably look just like Signalis. I mean, come on. Incorporating elements from Nier, Evangelion, and The King in Yellow, it's basically cheating. I'd honestly be fine if the onboarding was just done through the immaculate vibes and aesthetic, but the game itself preserves a ton of the classic charm of survival horror while making for a really accessible experience. You get the overhead view still associated with those older titles, but with crystal clear controls and presentation that never risks making you feel like you're fighting with the game. Not that I have anything against tank controls, mind you, but I know those two words are poison to a lot of other people who'd otherwise give the game a try. I disappeared into this game, not doing much at all in the day it took me to beat it, but venturing through the dark, moody, industrial setting. The game has such a good grasp at what makes survival horror click. The adaptable difficulty doing a great job at keeping items just scarce enough that I was counting every shot, going into every encounter, carefully considering which tools I would exhaust. That long-term stress and dread that goes beyond immediate enemy encounters. Each weapon feeling like it had a distinct purpose and place to be used. It also does the classic Resident Evil trope of enemies reanimating at seemingly random intervals, which helps keep me on my toes even more and made me pay attention to my environment, thinking about which frequent pathways I want to clear out for good. Enemy variety was also really nice as well, with some needing some really cool and creative methods to take them out. And while I realize I might just sound like I'm describing what makes survival horror in general great, I'm honestly hooked on the genre now thanks to this game. My only problem being that I would have liked a few more boss fights. What we got were great, but it did feel like there were only 2 real bosses in the game, one of which getting used as a regular enemy later on. You also probably know, good combat is only half of the equation. Classic survival horror needs a great map to truly shine, which Signalis 100% delivers on as well. The whole setting is tinged in this dystopic, apocalyptic cassette futurism that is strangely beautiful in its desolation and decay. I loved scrounging through the map for items and little pieces of lore, and a big part of this is thanks to the highly detailed setting and aesthetic flourishes. Past that, the layouts are just really well designed and at a sweet spot of complexity to where you'll be uncovering all kinds of shortcuts, hidden passages, and secrets to the point where traversal is a puzzle in and of itself without being too frustrating. The dedicated puzzles in the game are pretty fun as well, breaking up the exploration and combat quite nicely. All this coming out to what honestly feels like a near perfectly paced game. And I haven't even touched the story yet. It's told in a rather roundabout interpretive method, but what's there is pretty compelling. The writing does a lot with just a little. It made me genuinely care for everyone stuck in this extra-dimensional nightmare. I think it really says a lot that people are still making fan art and animations for both the story characters and enemy NPCs despite there being what feels like a total of 20 minutes or so of dedicated story in the entire game. The game plays around a lot with time and perspective, throwing in these gorgeous first-person story segments that let you see the game's world in a bit more detail. I adored these sections not just for how they looked, but also in how they really got you into the head of the characters who experienced these segments. Signalis' story works as a lot of things: a tragic love story, reflection on having to care for a terminally ill loved one, and also a grim reminder of how totalitarian structures can grind down, chew up, and spit out some of the most bright and wonderful people you've ever known. Seeing the whole life of Ariane, from her isolated yet hopeful childhood to a more troubled youth to a much-needed bright spot above the Penrose, finding love with Elster to its ultimate tragic conclusion, was ultimately just soul-draining. Going through the setting and finding out more and more about her life, the kind of person she was, what she enjoyed doing, and the bond she had with my player character, it made me wish there was another way, another answer to the story's conclusion, and boy, reaching that conclusion tore my heart out. So, if you're curious about trying the game out, you really can't go wrong. It clocks in at 6 to 12 hours depending on your pace, and can easily be beaten in 1 or 2 sittings, with multiple endings that give more than ample reason to replay. Whether you're new to the genre like me or a survival horror veteran, I think you'll have a really fun time. But, with how finely tuned the elements of a good survival horror game are, it makes me think about how developers design interactivity and player action in games. See, part of what makes games so interesting as an art form is the means by which we actively interact and help shape the story. The verbs in game design speak, and no game has gotten me to engage so closely with the text through these verbs as Season, a letter to the future. You play as a young woman venturing off into the world as an unknown phenomena is set to end it. Your goal? Record as much as you can about the world as it currently is so that knowledge can be passed down to those who will make it through to the new season. Along with the usual verbs like walk, ride a bike, examine, talk, you're given 3 more unique ones. You can take photographs of anything interesting you find on your way, record bites of sound from the environment and wildlife, and catalog all of that in your character's journal. These encourage a much slower sense of exploration that goes far beyond just searching for needed items or plot-related details. It really makes you stop and smell the roses, making your relation to the setting all that more intimate. Everyone's journal will end up looking different as they go through the game, it ending up being an opportunity for some really cool and personal player expression. Maybe there's a particular scenic angle from a cliff that'll catch your eye, or just a little trinket you found in a cluttered yard. You might find the ambient noise in a patch of dense forest calming, or be able to catch the rumbling of some centuries-old machines still chugging on in these final days. It feels like with the particular way it wants you to engage with the environment, Season's primary aim is a sensory one, to really get you to think about how it would feel to be in the game's setting. See, an old writing teacher of mine once said the benefits of prose was how it can invoke all of the 5 senses, not just sight and sound, but also taste, touch, and smell. And while the verbs of the game are still primarily audiovisual, the narration and story beats are also going to try their hardest to include those senses. You have these little segments where you have to pick memories to use in a ritual, each of those memories corresponding to one of the 5 senses, giving these little distinct portraits of the character's life that tell me more in just a few minutes than most games can do in hours. These reminders to try and engage with your 5 senses, really helping you connect more with the world and the shared experiences of those characters, forming your own unique view on the setting. As the one chronicling the last days of the season, you'll be the one who controls how it's seen by future generations. The next stage's perception filtered through yours. And that's just not an experience I can say the rest of the games on this list, or any other game really, has given me thus far. You know, maybe I should just go ahead and give Silent Hill a try. I'm hardly unique in counting Alan Wake 2 among my favorite games to come out in 2023, and honestly, it's not hard to see why. Remedy made some really smart changes to the formula of Alan Wake 1 while doubling down on everything that's made their past output special. First and foremost, their phenomenal world design. I am already partial to the Pacific Northwest thanks to shows like Twin Peaks, so returning to Bright Falls felt like coming home. Remedy has an incredible knack for environmental storytelling and just making each room in their games pop with life. It feels like every time I turn the camera in this game, there's some new detail in the map that helps make Bright Falls feel even more real and lived in. Even small throwaway areas, like this home at the Watery Trailer Park, tell a story about the people who live there. Supporting it all, and perhaps stealing the show, is a helping of mixed media videos and radio programs. Nothing made me more happy than walking by a TV and seeing a new ad by the Cascella brothers. The Dark Place and Alan segments are also dripping with the thickest tone imaginable, bringing you into this horror noir mirror of New York. Even with the long stretches of exploration, I never got tired of just going through the map and taking it all in. And unlike some games I'm talking about in this video, the map is filled with little rewards that help bolster you for the combat. As opposed to the rather frequent enemy encounters of the previous game that got to feel like a chore by the end, Alan Wake 2 paces out a smaller but more difficult set of enemy encounters, leading to much more tense and engaging fights that help sell the horror atmosphere. While the main combat mechanics are, to be honest, just a less polished Resident Evil 2 with the flashlight mechanic, I think it ends up fitting. Another added mechanic keeping it fresh is the guessing game you'll have to play as Alan. Most of the Taken in his levels are fake, so you'll constantly have to second guess whether the shadows you're walking around will jump out and start a combat encounter. With how well the fake Taken mimic the real ones, I spent so much of my time in Alan's sections playing Flashlight Chicken with them. Tying it all together is one of the most self-indulgent stories I've ever seen, reaching Kojima-esque levels. Sam Lake is constantly looking right at the camera and telling you how much he loves being a writer. The story is constantly shifting between horror and bizarre comedy so fast that you rarely have a chance to get tonal footing. Yet still, the story manages to click in the right way, harnessing and weaponizing its bizarre presentation, reveling in the unclear. It gives the player so many questions that it just refuses to answer. And honestly, I don't think I want them to be answered. Keeping everything open invites the player to participate, as a writer, in their own way. This is the last of the games on the list that actually came out in 2023, so if you want, you can go ahead and consider this my 2023 Game of the Year. And hey, I get it. What can be better than a game that has not just one, but two musical shootouts, a whopping level-sized tribute to Sleep No More, and some of the prettiest forests I've ever seen in a game? But if you stick around, I had two other games I played this year, Rise Even Further, that I'd like to share with you. For almost a millennium, there has stood a house, and throughout that ancient building's history, it has seen many residents. Some rich, some destitute, some innocent, some with blood on their hands. But one thing has stayed the same over the years. Each and every resident has been struck by misfortune. As the tragedies stack up each generation, many have begun to say that the house was cursed by a witch. This is the story of the house in Fata Morgana. You play as an unknown person with lost memories woken up in this house by a mysterious maid. She directs you to a series of doors, each holding the memories of the house's past residents and the ruin that befell them. Now, as a visual novel, there's not much I can say here that won't ruin some part of the experience besides that this is truly something special. If there's any title on the list I recommend just getting up and playing right now, it's this one. It's not just a great piece of gothic fiction, not just a great visual novel, but an overall wonderful work of storytelling as a whole. It takes a bit to get started, but the places the story ends up going and what it ends up having to say in the end are incredible. A few things I can't help but talk about, however. The game's plot delves into gender dysphoria and the transgender experience, and I'm gonna say, this might be one of my favorite handlings of the topics. The game is written with profound respect to that experience, and has one of my favorite transmasculine characters I've come across in fiction. That empathy spilling over into the game's main themes. I really loved how well the game expressed the tremendous value that can be found in just stopping and taking a moment to hear someone out, listening to their troubles and giving them a safe place to express their true feelings. That singular core idea expressed the best through the main protagonist. We don't formally meet the main character until about halfway through the game, and when we do, he's pretty flawed. He's rude to everyone around him, constantly shutting people off, and denying connection with the one person who's shown him genuine kindness. But as the story goes on, we see the reasons for his isolation, and his slow journey towards healing and learning to help others with their pain as well. The main character gaining a new strength, one that doesn't lie in conventional heroism or great physical prowess, but rather just the willingness to see things from another person's perspective and show them the empathy that others have denied them. Alright, let's be honest. If you've been paying attention to the music at all, you knew it was coming. Number 1's Library of Ruina. I played this game's predecessor, Lobotomy Corporation, earlier in the year and loved its story and how it told it through the game's mind-bogglingly difficult management mechanics, which were poison to my poor ADHD-addled brain. And likewise, this game has been lodged in my head for the past 10 months. Likely because it took me 6 of those months to beat it, but that's neither here nor there. Our story sees Roland, a washed-up, bottom-of-the-totem-pole fixer, get whisked away from the back streets of a hyper-dystopian city into the library, which is run by the harsh yet curious automaton Angela. You're taken on against your will as her servant and must welcome the other guests to the library in a reception. If they win, they can claim any book of their choosing, whether it imparts knowledge, power, or something else. If they lose, however, they are turned into a book themselves. Angela has you handle these receptions, along with the colorful cast of patron librarians, so that she can read these new books, learn more about the outside world, and nudge herself closer and closer to her mysterious goal. Getting to see Roland and Angela's development across the game's story, as well as getting the first real look at the larger world of Project Moon was such a treat. The game's setting blends oppressive dystopia with dark fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm variety to create a genre blend not unlike Jeff Vandermeer or China Miéville's new weird novels. You'll have organ harvesters and cybernetic prosthetics bumping up against fantastical creatures based on various myths, folktales, and pieces of literature. There's tons of different factions playing off each other and going after their own goals. The interconnected little histories really helping the city feel like this living, breathing, ever-evolving place. And inside the library, I really enjoyed getting to meet the patron librarians. Again, each of the patron librarians got fantastic arcs in Lobotomy Corporation as the Sephira, and it was cool to see their characters continue to grow and develop. There's a lot of charm and chemistry to the cast. I particularly enjoyed seeing a more mature Tippereth butt heads against Roland, a now at peace Chesed pushing the buttons of a mellowed out Gebbera, and in one of the biggest surprises from returning characters, getting to see Binna, who, as an Arbiter, destroyed the dreams of the Sephira in their previous lives, starting to form genuine relationships now with the people around her. Not everyone got a full arc per se, but it was still really nice getting to see just how much they've grown as people. Now inverting the structure of the previous game and passing on the wisdom they've gained to Roland and Angela. My only complaint with the game being that we didn't get more of those little slice of life segments with the librarians, most of their interactions just kind of being with Roland. There's so many ways to take the game's story. Is it a reflection on the forced technological modernization enacted upon Korea by Japan during its occupation? Is it a broad satire on modern Korean culture, from the Confucian education structure to the hyper-capitalist work environment? Is it a story of a woman learning to move on and connect with people again after years and years of abuse? Is it an attempt at adapting the Jewish Kabbalah into narrative form? It's honestly all of these in my mind, and so much more. The more I think back on the game, engaging with it as a text, the more I find, like how the whole game's story was inspired by occupation-era Korean poet Young Dong-ju's Sky, Wind, Stars, and poem, which you can see referenced in the game's subtitle. It's a whole rabbit hole that I don't have the time to go into, honestly, but it's a story that just keeps giving new angles and perspectives to approach from. Okay, Carter, I hear you ask. You've talked a lot about this game's story, but how does it play? And listen, I hear you, and I gotta say, it might be one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It all comes down to the clash system. I'm not exaggerating when I say that clashing makes me feel like I am 16 years old again, playing Persona 3 for the first time and discovering the once more mechanic. It's that good. When you and an opponent both throw out an attack at each other, you roll each dice on your page in sequence, the winner of each roll's effect going through. It might seem simple at first, but cards can have a ton of different dice formations and effects set onto each dice. This mechanic is the centerpiece of Library of Ruina's combat, and every single other mechanic ties into it, incentivizing you to clash as much as possible. For instance, we have the emotion system. Every time you clash, you gain positive or negative emotion points based on whether you win or lose, those points raising your overall emotion level, which refills your resources, can grant you extra moves per turn, nets you more rewards at the end of combat, and gives you access to ego pages during the fight, which can apply special passives or give you a new super or install to turn the tide with, meaning you always get something out of clashing, even if you lose. And hey, after using all those extra moves or shiny new supers, you're gonna want to raise your emotion again to keep topping up your resources and unlock even more ego pages. It all feeds back into itself, creating some of the most engaging turn-based combat I've ever played. Along with the regular reception also comes abnormality fights, which act as puzzle battles for each floor that require specific solutions and methods to defeat. I think these really helped to make sure you're getting creative with your builds and not just focusing on big number cards. These fights are used to create some of the game's most fun and memorable set pieces. Here's an example of a really fun fight from the mid-game. The first abnormality you'll fight as Tippereth is the vertical difficulty curve made manifest, the fan-favorite magical girl, the Queen of Hatred. Her gimmick is a hatred meter that fills across the background the more she loses clashes, and decreases the more she wins clashes, especially against certain marked units. If that bar fills up, she'll recover all of her health and turn into a big ol' dragon, and honestly, good luck if that happens. Your party will probably get wiped when she does this. You can play this fight straight and try to whittle her down while making sure you don't win too many clashes, or you can do what I did and apply a ton of bleed with the attacks you do land, which makes her take damage equal to the stack, wait, let me look here. Oh yeah, every time she rolls a dice. which doesn't count towards her hatred meter, effectively making her kill herself for you. Finding solutions like these are what really makes me like the Abnormality fights. The game will often feel like it's cheating, but it very much encourages you to just cheat back harder. And the music, by God, the music. There's so much to love here. The soundtrack getting you to feel exactly what the game wants you to feel in the moment. The floor themes all perfectly match the vibe of each patron librarian, like Netzach's sloshy, lethargic beats. Tipurath's determination tinged with past tragedy. And Geburah's rage, now honed and focused, but still burning strong. The game's music even tells a story with each battle, creating something that feels like the turn-based equivalent of Metal Gear Rising's dynamic soundtrack. Starting from the building anticipation of the pre-battle screen, going into a battle theme that establishes the character's motifs. Developing as the fight intensifies and crescendoing as you rise in emotion level. Until you reach the fight's climax. The game also has some stellar tracks provided for certain fights by J-pop group Millie that I love and also can't share due to copyright. Each of these pieces just fit together for me, the story, music, and gameplay all working in synchronicity, the journey through the city being one that will always stay with me. It may be edgy Kingdom Hearts for literature fans, but hey, that's just a plus for me. And honestly, when I put it like that, it was almost inevitable that it'd be my favorite thing I played in 2023. Alright, well, this is my first attempt at putting out a longer form video like this, so thanks for seeing it through. I hope I gave you all at least one cool thing to go and check out. As for now, I'm heading back into the city to catch up on Project Moon's newest game, Olympus Company. Who knows, I may be talking about it next year.